Welcome to Uppsala University. Most of you are from Uppsala University. Anko, welcome to Uppsala University.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for taking the time. So if you take us on a journey of maybe why you like chaos and how you got into this industry from the beginning. Is that something that you already knew that as a child, or how do you get into that?
No, not at all. I with my parents, we hardly flew. We would always pretty much drive to France and set up our tent there, and that was it. We had flown a few times, but it wasn't really something on my mind until I was really in your positions, pretty much in my last year at university, and economy was in full swing, 1999, and I told my then girlfriend, now wife, let's go travel, and we were both masters in law. Graduates. She had already finished, or she was about to finish her studies, and I had about 6 months left or something. And I said, if we don't do it now, then I know what the rest of our lives is going to look like. You're going to live together, you're going to buy a house, you're going to get married, and you're going to have children, and then you die. And that wasn't really appealing when I was 23. I hope you can relate to that. So I said, let's spice it up a bit and let's do something else. And we traveled 5 months or something backpacking in Southeast Asia, and I came back and I really thought, you know what, I'm in a way I'm stupid, right? Because I'm, as a law student, what you probably are going to do is you're going to work in a law firm and be a lawyer, and when you're a lawyer, the only thing you do is you read and write about others people's problems the whole day, and you're stuck in an office and you are surrounded by nothing but other lawyers. And again, that didn't really come across as very appealing to me. Where you are just with like-minded people who have the same education, I couldn't think of anything probably more boring for 40 years. And then so we traveled, and it was so exciting, right? It was absolutely brilliant. And it wasn't so much necessarily the flying or the flights themselves or the airline companies that we flew with, but it was just the fact of different cultures, different people, different food, different weather, different everything. And that was just wow. And then a friend of mine said, well, if you really want to do that, if you really want to go somewhere like in business, then why don't you join KLM? And he mentioned two very important things. He said, with KLM, you can work abroad. And he said, it's very difficult to get in. And that is also something about me. I'm very competitive. And I liked the challenge of trying to get in. And I did manage in the end. So that was great. And so on the 1st of January 2000, I really left my law degree and everything behind, and I joined the world of business. Great fun, I have to say.
So during that time when you started in the business, do you have already an idea that you wanted to, because you mentioned that you're very competitive, so do you have sort of a goal in the future that you wanted to come up in a high level?
I think the much more important thing, and this is stupid, because first we're ambitious, right? And you want to achieve things, but I never thought of becoming a CEO. I never thought of being a CEO. I remember in that time that friends spoke about, oh, well, he or she is going to be this and that in life. And I don't think that anybody put the label CEO on me necessarily. I really don't think so, at least. I had something else, which I still believe is what's driving me today, which is curiosity. I'm really curious. And what I liked was, so I knew in a way what law studies was all about. I didn't know what working in a law firm was going to be like. I did my internship there for a few months, and then went traveling, and then saw the light. But that curiosity was, okay, now I'm in the business world, and everything was new. Literally everything was new. And just, I'm going to tell you something stupid, but when you do your law studies, everything is in Word. You will never, ever see Excel or PowerPoint, right? It's just Word. So I get to the workforce, and in my first project, there's something on paper, and it just didn't really fit, and it was really stupid and ugly. And then someone says, oh, but then why don't you try landscape instead of portrait? And I don't know if you know what landscape and portrait is, right? I think, okay, good. There's many people out there. I didn't. I had no idea what landscape was, because in Word, everything, of course, is just portrait. That's how basic my understanding was basically of whatever else was out there, outside of a word, outside of a language, outside of law studies. And that was already, I was in the workforce. So the fact that they kept me is beyond me, right? For not even knowing those things. But it tells you that really I was driven by curiosity. How does it work? What is it really like? What happens? And I think in the end, and that's also really what drove me to come to SAS, because SAS has always been one of these extremely difficult airlines. The entire airline industry knows that this is so difficult, with multiple states as shareholders and 38 unions and I don't know what, and right high up in Europe, and you don't have really London or Paris, right, with 10 million people living there. And how do you deal with that?
And how do you translate that curiosity and that idea of be competitive into sort of a culture within a large organization like Avianca, or in this moment SAS? Is that something that you try also to sort of spread out among your team?
And this is maybe a silly one, but operational performance is extremely important to customers, right? So when you look at airlines as a whole, it's very complex to run an airline, and the reason is that in our case, we operate between 800 and 850 flights today, for instance, 814 flights. And we operate that from Svalbard to, we currently fly to Morocco and from Los Angeles to Tokyo, right? So 850 flights, 815 is already difficult in its own right, because all of them need to have a different captain and all of them need to have a different co-pilot. And you have, of course, right, first officer, and you need all the cabin crew, and you need catering on board, and you need all these things and everything. But then if you add all the complexity of all the weather and all the time zones and all the technology that comes with it, so it's quite challenging. We know that you care about us flying. You don't want us to cancel your flight, right? So fly on time, so that you can get to wherever you want to go on time. And 3, that we give you back whatever you gave us. And that can be a bag or a pet, or in some cases, people even send their children, right, on board of our flight. So if we give you back your pets, your bags, and your children, we fly on time, and we didn't cancel the flight, then 70% of our NPS is in the bag, right? So if you do that well. And that sounds very simple, but once again, if you do that throughout the globe consistently on 815 flights a day, that becomes really challenging. Out of 655 airlines in the world, in the full month of March, we were again Europe's number 1, the most punctual airline in Europe, but the world's number 2. So the second most punctual airline in the world out of 655 airlines. Right? And
do you think that has to do with your leadership skills and your leadership philosophy on how to run the company?
Well, what was interesting is that no, and a bit of yes, hopefully, right? What I do see in companies is that as soon as CEOs start caring about certain things, whatever they are, then typically the organization starts caring more about it. And so for me, customer focus and NPS and real customer experience has always been really one of my focuses.
Thank you. So we also have received some questions before coming here. So one of the questions is related to the process to recruit a CEO for a large airline. Could you share some of the thoughts about that and maybe your own process
it's always
been there several times?
and it always, I think, sounds very exciting, but it's just very straightforward. You get a call from a executive search company, headhunter, and you say whether you're interested or not. So you go into a process, you have a lot of interviews, and at the end of the interviews, it's you or someone else. Right? It's very straightforward. Now, I think let's maybe deep dive a bit on that, but
because they were probably thinking, what is it that it requires for you to actually get, if it is between you and somebody else, why would it be you and not the other person? So what is it?
So that's really, of course, a question for the chairman at that time. But trying to puzzle a few things together, at least, is that apparently, but again, I wasn't, of course, in the room when they took all the decisions. I was on the other side. They wanted someone who didn't come from Scandinavia. They wanted, I think, a foreigner this time to lead it, to probably have completely new insights, right? They were also very clear that they wanted someone from the aviation industry. And that's what I do see happening more often, that I think probably until where I was recently, or where I am now, Now, occasionally, people start calling me and say, "Hey, would you like to become a CEO in a completely different industry?" But until that point, it was always you're being typecasted. It's a narrow casting, right? It's really not broadcasting. Someone age 50 has left them, and he or she was male or female and had a background in finance. Now we're looking for a 50-year-old man or woman who did finance, right? And it's just because that's easy for the board. It's easy for the colleagues that are around, right? So you don't want to rock the boat too much. And occasionally, and I think that's where at least I've been fortunate, occasionally a board wants something completely different. And again, that's where I am very grateful for the board taking that decision at that time, both for Avianca and for SAS, that they wanted to go somewhere in a very different direction and chose in a way an outsider, right?
So there is also another question in terms of any mistakes that you probably now, when you look back in your career, that you have made as a CEO that you sort of reflect upon, and you learned from that mistakes.
Yeah, and where to start, right? Really, I mean, list them. And without even thinking of now a specific example, but you maybe hire the wrong people, or you fire the wrong people, or you take a bad business decision and you have to revert. There was a funny one, I think, in the beginning where I came to SAS, and at Avianca, we had also put a lot of focus on operational performance, because operational performance, I've spent a bit of time already, it's extremely important for customers. 2, it's extremely important for your own crews, for your pilots and your cabin crew, for 2 reasons. 1, if you're supposed to be in bed by 11 after a long day, then you really want to be in bed by 11, and you don't want to be in bed by 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock because all your flights are delayed. With the risk of not being able to fly the next morning's flight because you haven't had enough time to rest. And so it's also point number 3, you save a lot of cost when you run an efficient operation, because then everybody's in bed by 11 and you can start the next morning. Your pilots and cabin crew can start again because they had sufficient rest, right? So it's for those 3 reasons that you really want to make sure that there is solid operational performance. At Avianca, in my last month in 2021, Avianca actually became the most punctual airline in the world, number 1 in the world. That was in COVID, so everybody flew, right? Hardly much, whatever, 50% or something was flying. But hey, Avianca was number 1 in the world at that time. I moved to SAS, and sorry, I should say, in Avianca, the chairman had come up with something that he had seen work before, where you give an on-time performance bonus. And that was $30, $50, and $100 per month if you would make certain levels. Now, okay, $30 a month was in Latin America for pilots. That's still not a lot of money, but for other people it is. But the whole point was that literally everybody, from assistants up to sea level, the entire company would get $30, $50, or $100 if they made certain targets. So it was really driving teamwork. It was about teamwork, because getting an aircraft off the ground, you need pilots, you need the cabin crew, you need fuel, you need catering, you need passengers on board, you need gates to check in, you need a pushback truck, you need everybody on the ground, maintenance, but everything needs to work in order for an aircraft to take off. And so truly it is the biggest team sports there is in business. So I wasn't necessarily convinced, but chairman said, let's do this. We did it, and wow, right? So many of the things that we did, many of the decisions that were great, but one of them definitely was the chairman saying, let's go for an on-time performance bonus. Okay, Avianca becomes number 1 in the world, so I go to SAS, and we're definitely not number 1 in the world at that time. And I'm like, hey guys, let's do a few things, and let's do an on-time performance bonus. And that fell completely on its face. Unions against it, everybody against it, because of course this is Scandinavia, and in Scandinavia we're not motivated by money, and we're all equal, so you don't need to do this anyway. So it's a capitalistic approach to a fundamental problem, and you can't solve it that way. Fine. So after 6 months, I said, okay, clearly I was wrong, but I would like to understand, because we haven't solved our issue yet, right? So then how are we going to solve it? And then we solved it in all the other ways that we did, and we got there in the end. But clearly that could be, right, considered a mistake, and you just turn back. As long as you don't make grave mistakes on matters of life and death, also my experience is it doesn't really matter. You can always roll back, right? It's fine. Try something, live a little.
The thing is that been an issue for you too? I mean, you're coming from Colombia, Mexico, Qatar. I mean, all these experiences in these different countries that are quite different as well compared to what we're used to here in Sweden. Has that been challenging for you to sort of readapt? I mean, obviously you've been here before, so you were familiar with Sweden. This is not something new for you, but coming with this position and all these responsibilities and have to deal with very, very tough decisions as well. Is that something that
it's both, it's fun and rewarding, and it can be frustrating, right? Let's be honest.
What is the most challenging thing to work in this environment?
Cultural differences. That's what I mean, right? Cultural differences are both. It's the reason that we chose this life, right? Again, we backpacked, we traveled, we got back, and we thought, you know what? We want to live abroad, we want to work abroad. Fantastic, and in a way, we've been now living abroad for 20 years. We're actually travelers, right? Still, we travel and we get paid to travel. Right, they pay us to just travel the world. It's beautiful, right? So just we in that sense we've managed, right? But the cultural differences are fun. They're rewarding. You pick up different languages. Right, again, the food, the culture. Hey, Mexico, beautiful, right? Beaches, food, culture, and then you come back to Sweden, and it's like, oh yeah, hold on, it's different. It's different.
That's another question from the audience.
But you worked in Qatar.
Yeah.
So in a way, they try to have a certain image, right? That country and those airlines. What was like the main difference between Qatar and Sweden in the aviation industry?
Yeah, well, Qatar at that point. Look, I went there in 2010 before they got the World Cup assigned to them. And whoever we would speak to was, okay, well, we've got a new job. We're leaving Europe. I was living in London at the time. We're going to live in Qatar. Where? Right? Really, you had to show it on a map. We had to really take out a map and show them. And that, if you now think back, 2025, all of you know where Qatar is. All of you have seen, right, what they have done, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? But everything. But it's definitely a country that's punching above its weight. And what is different about it, they have an extreme ambition level. 5-star wasn't good enough. It's extreme growth, but it's also extreme focus still in a weird sense, maybe also on geopolitics, right? What kind of role can they play and how can they play that? And I found it fascinating. Absolutely fascinating to live there, to see that growth. Where when I joined Aeromexico in 2014, the average age of the traveler in the Mexican market was 31 years of age. It's the average of a Mexican traveler, right? I mean, when I look around me, most of the time people are bolder or got more gray hair than I have. So, hey, there is something also exciting and energetic about those markets. And occasionally in Europe, I feel we've lost that. Yeah, no, very different, at least than a few years ago, right? We needed the restructuring in a way, unfortunately, and plenty more angles to talk about in that sense. But again, let's look at this. And here, I'm hesitating a bit because we're not on the stock market anymore. We're a private company right now, and so the policy is right now to not share a lot of data because we don't have to anymore, right? Which is quite nice actually in many ways, because when you're stock listed, I had to go face all these journalists, and it's not about facing journalists, but it was 32 times I had quarterly earnings reports where you had 32 of the same questions and answer sessions throughout the day, and it was draining. And so it was quite nice to not have that for a while. Much better. Some really historic highs. We're doing really well on key elements, load factors, cash position. I mean, really just right, solid. Operational performance we spoke about, which is really important because that also means that your NPS score is really high. We are currently about 40 points higher in our NPS scores than last year. And for me, NPS is the best indication of repurchase intention. So if you keep on having satisfied customers, then logically they'll be back, right? And so last year we were in the low teens, we're currently in the mid 50s NPS for a service company that we are, I think is really solid. It's really good. What was very challenging for us was the Swedish kroner. Much of our cost is in dollars. And so with the Swedish kroner going from when I started 8 to 9 to 10 to 11 and topping out at 11.30, 1 kroner difference is, call it, 1.5 billion on EBIT and almost 3 billion on EBT, right swing. So 1 kroner difference. Now, fortunately, since then, 11.30, it's now, right, it's 9.95. The last second I checked before going into this audience with you. We're really watching that like a hawk because it's not something that you control yourselves, as we have seen this week, right? And so that was really challenging. And then the European Trading Emission Scheme, right? The emission trading scheme of Europe, ETS. Lots of volatility, and hey, we are very much driving the sustainability agenda. But that was very challenging. It's coming down again now also to normal levels. Fuel is coming down to somewhat lower levels. Even kroner is going in the right direction. Still work to do. I think when I look at where SES stands on the plan that we have committed with our investors, we're pretty much on or slightly ahead, better than the plan. But with all of the call it madness in the world. There is for airlines, you can never really sit still. You have to keep working it and make sure that you're really in a continuously better shape, and that's what we're doing.
Obviously, SAS has reinvented itself in a way, and Chapter 11, of course, I guess in Sweden, many people have been wondering why first of all you had to go through a reorganization, and why have you chosen to do that in the United States and Chapter 11? And if you can just briefly explain first to our audience here what Chapter 11 is, and then take us through that process of the reconstruction.
Yeah, and I'm afraid that by now I'm on a really political kind of statement, so we might as well continue on it. Europeans typically, and this is where I always start explaining Chapter 11, Europeans typically, when you talk about bankruptcy, that's a very bad thing, right? And I see some people nodding here again, right? Bankruptcy is bad, and there's a stigma about bankruptcy. In the United States, it's not that everybody says, yeah, let's go bankrupt and let's do that for fun, but there is a different view on bankruptcy in the United States. You've tried. Didn't work out. Try again. And that Chapter 11 is two things. First of all, it's not bankruptcy, but it's bankruptcy protection. And so we were never bankrupt, but we protected ourselves from going bankrupt by filing for Chapter 11, and then you get to restructure the company. And so that's a very big difference between European thinking and US thinking. The second big difference, I think, is that actually that law exists in the United States because it gives you, as a company, it gives you tools that in Europe we don't have. And certainly at that point in Sweden, we don't have. We're, of course, Swedish AB, so we had to use either Swedish or some European mechanism, but it didn't really work for us. And so the Chapter 11 one, even though it had been untested in Europe on an airline, some other European companies had used it or had gone through it. We thought that for us it was actually the right tool. Now, what does it give you, for instance? Chapter 11, very technically and very legal, gives you as a company the right to tell all your suppliers that you have to stay with us. It's called a stay order. So you file for Chapter 11, and as of that second, no one can walk away from you, and no one can, for instance, take their aircraft away. Well, it's pretty powerful.
That's why it's called protection. So
that's protection, right? So you get to run your business, and everybody was always like, "Ooh, it's going to be very scary," because as soon as you file for Chapter 11, everybody thinks you're bankrupt. No, we're not bankrupt. We're protecting ourselves, and we're still flying, right? We're earning and burning our Euro bonus points, and we're operating still, and it all worked. That stay protection, that stay order is very important, because then you get to sit down with your lessors, and then you get to renegotiate, and you get to sit down with your IT vendors, and you get to renegotiate, and so then you have bought yourself time, right? Bankruptcy protection, and in a protection period, you get to restructure the company, and there was just no European equivalent available, I think, at that time.
And you came with some experience, because you had done that with Avianca as well.
Yeah.
Is that an idea? Is that sort of inspiration for SAS to go through this process because you brought that with you, or just
no? You sometimes think that you would like to take credit for such a devious plan or whatever. It really wasn't the case, because you don't want to end up there still, right? But when I joined, we had the Delta variant. And I saw a lot of people around me already say, okay, this is great, because now it's over, right? COVID is over. And you lived in Sweden, hopefully, at that time, and you had some freedom, but the rest of the world, again, coming from Latin America at that point, it was really terrible. I mean, people were literally locked up in their homes. Avianca, we didn't fly for 6 months. We were 6 months on the ground. We operated 3 flights a day, humanitarian flights to just rescue people from left, right, center. 3 flights a day out of the normal, I think, close to 1,000 or something, 900, 1,000 that Avianca would do. So, guys, it really was pretty terrible. And I came here, and people were already like planning our next growth phase again. And I was, well, I'm not convinced. And I'm clearly, I'm not smart enough to win a Nobel Prize, but yeah, a few months later, then you had Omicron, and then Omicron had happened, and then there was a Russian invasion. And then of course we had the strike in 2022. And if you add all of that up, there was just no way to escape the inevitable, which is your numbers just don't add up. And that's where Chapter 11 came from.
And how is that different today compared to before the reconstruction? Because per definition, so it has to be something different in a way. So what has changed in terms of?
It's coming back also to your question, right? I mean, we are financially much healthier. We still have things to do, but the SAS Forward project program that we launched in February 22, just days before Russia invaded Ukraine. Timing is everything in life, right? Great. We said was going to be a 4-year project, right? So a 4-year program, SAS Forward, 2022, 2026. What we didn't know at that time, that as part of it, we would raise the equity, including a competitor, France KLM, who is part of SkyTeam, and as part of, therefore, the whole program, we would change from Star Alliance to SkyTeam. Now, that takes a year, and all of the IT and all of the IT resources, the project, the money that was dedicated to the normal 2024 year was then redirected to moving into SkyTeam, right? 23, 24. And therefore, we have also said very clearly internally, where the project was 4 years at the beginning, right now the program is 5 years, right? So it will run until 27 at least. And that, means that we still have things to do, but we are financially in a much better state. We are operationally now top of the world. Our customer appreciation, I think from our data, what we can see has never been higher. Load factor has definitely never been higher. Our ancillary sales has never been higher. So there's lots of things that you can do in a restructuring when you're dealing with the legal and the financial parts, where in the end, it's about a company, right? I mean, you have to be there for customers in the end, and that you can reset and revamp. And that's why we're doing much better.
Will you still be CEO at SAS in 1 year from now? Yes or no?
Okay. I get that question quite a lot, actually, quite a bit. Last year, everybody thought, okay, as soon as the restructuring is done, which was back in July, August, then probably he will immediately resign the next day and move on to the next thing. Hey, quite surprisingly to many people, I'm still here a year later. So right now, my answer is absolutely yes to that question. Look, the seasonality as a whole for us is actually quite challenging, because from, call it, December to February, no one wants to fly. Right, which to me is surprising, because the weather is really not that great. But if you compare it to June, July, and August, the seasonality for Northern European airline is tremendous. Right, many more people want to fly in a summer peak than in winter, which is different, for instance, also in from Aeromexico. Aeromexico, everybody goes to the beach from the 15th of December to the 15th of January. They all go somewhere, either it's South America or to the beach somewhere, or whatever. Right? It's massive. It's absolutely massive, including flights to Europe, of course. But here, that's far less pronounced, and that seasonality therefore is challenging because you want to really maximize those summer months in which you make money. Right? It's no surprise. Pretty much every single airline in Europe is loss-making in the winter months. I think literally every European airline is loss-making in the winter months, and then we all are profitable in the summer. And how do you balance it? Right? How do you manage those two? You want to decrease your losses in the winter, and you want to optimize, of course, your profits in the summer, for which you also touch upon a very interesting point, because indeed, historically, in July, airlines would just ground themselves. Bra, SAS, all these Scandinavian airlines. When I worked for Air France KLM in North Europe 15, 20 years ago, we had 6 daily flights to Stockholm from Amsterdam, but in July, 1. It would dry up. It would literally dry up, and everybody would go to their summer house and not be seen for a month, and then it would come back in August, right? That has changed, and clearly that is still changing. But for instance, it means that when you talk about, for instance, pilots or cabin crew, you have to balance that. We, of course, do want to give people holidays, but if those really are the only months in which you can make money, well, yeah, then you really need all hands on deck, right? You want all aircraft, all pilots, all cabin crew to fly as much as we can in those months, because that's when we make the money to go into the winter season in which we lose money again. So then you want to make sure that you spread out those holidays, not just in July. That would be pretty detrimental, but you want to go as much as you can, of course, to be able to run the business. This is not anti whatever group or labor force, right? But you just have to fly when your people want to fly, when your demand wants to fly, when your passengers want to fly. SAS as a whole, and I always have to be very respectful here, is a very old company, 1946. It also means that a lot of inefficiency in the end creeps in, and I call that holier than the Pope. So, for instance, Airbus says, this is the way to maintain an aircraft. And this is what you have to do to maintain an aircraft. But in SAS over the years, you well, actually, let's also do this and that and this and that. And you know what? Just for the fun of it, let's add this and that. And Connect was a completely new airline that doesn't suffer from that disease. And that is still the case. So our procedures, processes, for instance, on maintenance, which is a massive chunk of your costs, are significantly lower. What we're trying to do is now harmonize between those two, right? Harmonize, for instance, those maintenance manuals that you can, get the efficiencies, the benefits of that. Two, Connect, as I think you would know then, was created also in London, where, for instance, pension funds are a very different level and a very different scale. And we are an international business that needs to compete internationally. What is always surprising to me is that, for instance, a lot of labor unions always said, well, yeah, we want job security. Yeah, but the only way you can get job security is actually if you're a profitable company. There is no other way. And so you should be really fighting with us to make sure that the company gets to a healthy margin. And I'm not looking for a 10, 20, 30% margin, but I do believe that for an airline our size, you will have to get to an 8% margin at least, right? And the company has never even made half of that in the history of the company, right? And so, hey guys, if you really want job security, then you should also be interested in making sure that this company really is profitable. And so if we can take out a chunk of maintenance cost by looking at something that is objectively better, then we should. Training days, ground days, right? All of it is far more efficient in other areas and in other parts of, well, the world for sure, but even in Europe, even in European airlines. And that's why some of that is still there.
So in connection to, well, you mentioned, of course, SAS is competing in the international market, and we've all seen what's been happening these last days with the tariff. And I guess some of you are also wondering, what is your view on the tariff and how is that affecting the company at the moment? If you can share with us more.
We have, surprisingly, not seen massive impacts yet on our demand. We're seeing something, but also we've had more flights. We're opening a new destination to Seattle, for instance. So we're adding capacity to the United States, for which we therefore have to, of course, go into different segments in the market. We just did our big campaign right at the moment when Trump came out with his tariff. So yeah, then you sell for different yields segments, or you sell to different segments. You sell at a different yield point than you would do in a normal week. So difficult really to say here is truly what's going on, right? Because that data is a bit more convoluted, but it's not as strong as it was, call it a month, 2 or 3 ago, right?
And it's very unpredictable, so we don't really know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. That unpredictability is
it's not a good friend with business.
No, it's not a good friend for business. It's not a good friend for
anyone.
Personal economies either, right? I mean, you do want to know what's going on and before you commit to anything. And yeah, certainly I guess we're not in a position of building plants or deciding where you're going to build your next plant. Very tricky. The effect it has on the kroner, on fuel, for us at this point seems to be positive, but it came off a very high base, right? Which was completely unhealthy to us. So, hey, we do have to bring that down even further. The fair market value of the dollar is still probably 15% inflated as far as we can see, right? We're still around 10. Like I said, when I joined SAS, we were at 8.18. So it's still elevated from an historical perspective.
So another aspect that is very interesting in aviation, but also what you guys are doing is sustainability. So your work on sustainability is also something that you are talking about a lot. Can you share with us more about what is it that you guys are doing and why it is important to?
Yeah, no, let's break it down. I think when you ask us what we're doing, I think the why we're doing it, I don't think we have to explain to this generation. I really hope not, at least, right? So that's pretty obvious, and we're all really committed to that. I think the real challenge is, how do you find technological solutions to the problem? Right? How can we build something that is a better world, given everything else that we've got going on? And I mean, not Trump or terrorists, but an aircraft with engines. I mean, when you look at it in the world, you got tens of thousands of aircraft that are flying around. You can't just replace them overnight, right? It just won't work. Debt and equity, I mean, it will be completely derailed. So we're looking for solutions that will, in a short term, fit the infrastructure that we have built, airports, aircraft, and engines, because that will be the fastest way to get somewhere. And in the longer term, of course, really try and get to creative solutions that hopefully someone will crack. Now, let me be more specific. In the short term, that means, therefore, SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, or eSAF. SAF would come from feedstock, livestock that there's just simply not enough of. So we know that SAF as a whole cannot be the solution, but you hopefully will have solutions to make it ethanol to jet, alcohol to jet, right, power to X, where you can try and convert some of that stuff into eSAF and then create a new kerosene. In the end, that's what you're trying to do, because that means that you keep your aircraft and your engines the same as what they are today, right? Now, that is very challenging. The cost of eSAF or SAF for the time being, if already you can order the amounts and the quantities that you need, which is not a given, are about 3 to 10 times higher than fossil fuel. And fossil fuel is about 25% of an airline's bill, right? So somewhere between 20 and 25%. So imagine pretty much every airline is already on the verge of constant bankruptcy, right? Bankruptcy protection, right? We don't make the margins as an industry that I think are really needed. And then you take your 25% costs and you would double, triple, quadruple, or quintuple it. I mean, forget about it, right? You cannot make the case, and that is a real challenge. So we need production of SAF, we need production of eSAF to increase significantly, for hopefully then the price to come down the same way as it was with wind and solar energy. And that is something that we hope for, of course. But then in the longer term, there is at least two technologies that people are trying and testing, and that is electrical aviation. And there we are involved with Hart Aerospace in Gothenburg, Swedish company, well-funded, well-run. And they're trying to build for 2028, 2029, a 48-seater. Now, 48 seats is not big. We typically have aircraft that are bigger, but we would already be very happy if someone produces a 48-seater, because then we can really test and try it, right? And we can really put that into production and hopefully, work with that. And there are some routes that you can make work probably with the 48-seater, Arlanda Visby, Arlanda Gothenburg, right? If it really has that range, which we think it will have, then that could be a great aircraft. However, in 2028, 2029, they might only produce the first one. So before you have that production up and running to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 a year, 100 a month, whatever you're talking about, right? Hey, hopefully in my professional lifetime, but that's a challenge to get that. And then you want to up the 48 seats to 100, 150, 200 seats. I mean, the biggest aircraft that we have today are 300 seats on batteries. And you want that to have a range of 10,000 kilometers. I mean, here we are talking about a 48-seater, maybe in 2028, 2029, one 48-seater to maybe fly from Arlanda to Visby. In the end, you want to go to 300-seaters that can fly the ocean. And again, in our professional lifetime, I think that's going to be, I hope, really hope that we're wrong, but it remains to be seen. And then the third one is hydrogen. Airbus has spent an awful lot of time and money on hydrogen aircraft. And long story cut short, basically come to the conclusion about a month ago that they said, we're punting, right? We're stalling that project a bit. We thought we're going to have it ready by 2035. We now think at the earliest it might be 2040. 2040, that's another 15 years, and the same things apply. Then you would maybe have one or two of them before you have a whole pipeline of 100 of those aircraft being produced a year, yada, yada, yada. My previous speech on electrification. It is very hard to abate. This industry is a very hard to abate industry. And I don't think, and I'm not saying that to therefore get out of jail free, right? And just, okay, well, then we can just keep on doing what we're doing. I think it's just objectively true that this is a hard to abate industry. And how do we deal with that? Someone needs to come up with a technological breakthrough in order to make this all work. And that Europe hasn't done so far. And I'm a bit scared that with whatever's going on in the world right now, that if Europe has to take one decision, that then if there were to be a lot of money, that money will then go just to defense. There is a crossover because defense means that you can look after yourself and your own independence. And I think energy independence is part of that independence. So we're still trying to make sure and fight. And you actually see the military really involved there. The military is a big user of SAF and probably under that same umbrella of we want European independence, we want European energy independence, and therefore let's try and create this industry of SAF, eSAF.
Let's take a couple of questions from the audience here. Just take a set of questions. Yes, please.
Answered, but we know that batteries are pretty heavy in aircraft.
Yeah.
So do you think there is a real chance that the future of aviation is that the short haul is going to be battery and the long haul is going to be maybe biofuels or something else that we maybe don't know?
Yeah, that's a logical split. There would be
take some other questions. Yes.
It will be at least easier to get there,
Yeah, I
right?
can
But then still, electrification on a 180-seater, which is our workhorse, right? The 320 Neo, 180 seats for a 4-hour flight to Malaga, electrified. let's see when we see that.
Okay, my question is pretty long, but when you appeared on 30 Minutes on SVT a few years ago, you mentioned that certain domestic routes in Sweden aren't necessarily profitable, but you also emphasized that from a broader perspective, these routes contribute to national connectivity and in turn support the overall economy. Now that SAS is a privately owned company and the Swedish state is no longer a shareholder, do you see a risk that some of these unprofitable domestic routes, particularly to destinations in northern Sweden, could be discontinued?
I find it a very interesting topic because frequently flying is considered almost like this. It's from the capital. What is the connectivity of the capital? And what about Arlanda and this whole Arlanda-Bromma discussion? I'm very outspoken about that. This country shouldn't have had Bromma already for the last 40, if not 50, 60 years. But it's not just about the connectivity for the capital. I was born and raised in a very small village, a few hours away from the capital in the Netherlands. And so I do also realize how important it is for a country to be connected. And when you look at Sweden, very different from the Netherlands, of course, this very elongated, right, thousands of kilometers. I mean, the longest flights, if there isn't one today, but if you would fly from Kalmar, Malmö, whatever, to Kiruna, that's a 2-hour flight, right? That's significant. And let's therefore realize that you're never going to put, as politicians or a society, at least for the next 100 years, probably you're not going to put a train set in, right? The cheapest way of doing that is probably still having that air connectivity, but having the transformation towards a green aviation industry, a sustainable aviation industry, and connect the country that way. You don't have to build highways, you don't have to build railroads, you don't, right? It's all there and it's through the air. That said, when I look at the domestic market in Sweden, it is just not great. There is a reason that a lot of it, this is funny actually, just let me ask you a question. How many airlines do you think have existed in Sweden? There's actually, and I'm looking at you, the union pointed this out to me, the pilot union themselves pointed this out to me. There is a Wikipedia page, don't look at it now because then you'll know the answer. How many Swedish airlines have tried and failed? How many defunct Swedish airlines are there? Airlines that existed at one point and no longer exist. Let's just make this 1, 2, 5, 10. Give me something. 10. All right. Who goes?
5.
5. 8. 15. Come on, one more. Go higher. 20. Go higher. 40. Go higher. 63. 63. When you look at the Swedish domestic market again, and you can it's Wikipedia, so if I'm wrong, it's because my source is wrong, and then, right, look at it. I think it's called literally defunct airlines in Sweden, or defunct Swedish airlines or something. In Norway, I think the number is 110. It means that everybody tries, but it's very hard to make it work.
So looking ahead in the future now, just checking that you also have to fly very soon, and we need to wrap it up. What is the future like for SAS, for the industry? What are sort of the main challenges and opportunities? You've been talking a little bit about that in terms of energy transition and all that, and of course now we have so many tensions in the world and things are changing rapidly. But how do you look at it?
Yes, I think your questions and all your questions today were a good summary of both the opportunities and the challenges. I think the challenge definitely is sustainability as a whole, and I really don't mean that just for SAS or for the airline industry, but I think still for the world, right? How do we solve it? But who comes up with the technological breakthroughs, right? Someone needs to crack the technological code, and I would like Europeans to do that, because then again we can be more independent, right? As a continent, let's say. I am a firm believer, after 25 years in the industry, that the European aviation space needs to be consolidated further. and I've given my views on Air France KLM there. Once again, that's not a decision that SAS can take, but I think it is a decision that would be hopefully logical and should contribute. When you look at the United States, around 80% of traffic is with 4 airlines. When you look at Europe, it's about 17 airlines, and that is just unhealthy. It means that every single time that the world sneezes, that most airlines will go to their national governments and ask for a bailout. And I think as a taxpayer, and for all records, I'm really not right-wing conservative at all. I really identify as center-left, but I am not pro this running to your state and running to the European Union and asking for money. I think business should fix itself.
Anko, it's been a pleasure to have you here at Uppsala University. You're a very busy person, and it's been so interesting to listen to, get to know you better, and also the work that you're doing. We have a very small gift for you, but hopefully this is something for you to remember us at Uppsala University. You're always welcome to come back here and visit us, and hopefully we will have more of these interactions in the future.
Yeah.
And please, a big round of applause for. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to come here and listen to this very interesting conversation. Thanks.